Our opening thought this morning comes from the Reverend Mr. Fred Rogers. From Dear Mr. Rogers, does it ever rain in your neighborhood? Letters to Mr. Rogers. This is actually one of his responses to a letter. Mr. Rogers says, love doesn't mean a state of perfect caring. To love someone is to strive to accept that person exactly the way they are, right here and now, and to go on caring through joyful times and through times that may bring us pain. Our next reading comes from Reverend David Usher and his reflections on the third principle. He writes, so we accept each other as we are, and we expect each other to change. What does encouragement to spiritual growth mean, if not that wherever you are now in your journey, whatever you believe now, we expect you to be open to doing the challenging work of deepening your spirit, of changing your mind, and perhaps, if necessary, of getting over yourself. Our next reading comes from Reverend Rob Hardy's from All Souls Church Unitarian in Washington, D.C. And this comes from the 7 Principles in Word and Worship, edited by Ellen Brandenburg. Spiritual growth isn't about a vertical ascent to heaven, but about growth in every dimension at once. It's spirituality in 3D. Growth in spirit doesn't measure one's proximity to a God above, but rather the spaciousness of one's own soul, its volume, its capacity, its size. We need souls that can take in the world in all of its complexity and diversity, yet still maintain our integrity. And we need souls that can love and be in relationship with all of this complexity. Instead of fight or flight, we need a spiritual posture of embrace. Our discourse this morning is a continuation of our reflections on the 8 principles, and this morning I'll be focusing on principle 3, which is acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. And the framing question for my discourse this morning is, how can we both embrace and accept one another in our differences while also growing together spiritually in a diverse community? I begin with the assertion that when religion makes us believe that we are not accepted and not loved just as we are, then it is a problem. Religion becomes a problem when it states that we are not loved or accepted just as we are. If we loved and accepted people as they are, rather than trying to save them or trying to convert them, the world would be a much more loving and peaceful place, I believe. The highest mission of humanity is not to convert persons to the same religious perspective. The highest mission of humanity is the creation of beloved community. And we can be different and diverse, have different views, different perspectives within that beloved community. When we accept and love each other as we are and cultivate a sense of true belonging without the threat of hell hanging over us or exile from community hanging over us, when we are able to cultivate a true sense of belonging, then we develop the trust that is necessary, that is needed to challenge one another, to grow together in expressing love and justice more effectively and more fully in the world. But it takes love and acceptance first to be able to foster that trust, to cultivate that trust, to challenge each other towards more spiritual growth. Because then our motivation comes from the positive incentive to grow more fully as persons into beloved community rather than coming from fear. The experience of love, the experience of acceptance in community should be experienced as a given. It simply is the case that we are loved and accepted as we are. That is a given. It's not something that we have to gain. It's not something for which we have to prove ourselves worthy through accepting a certain set of beliefs or doctrines. It is simply a given that we are loved and accepted as we are. Very few things are more damaging to persons than having their love and acceptance by their families and communities be predicated on the way they believe or on having to reject who they experience themselves to be. That conditional love and acceptance is so damaging to persons in comparison to unconditional love and acceptance for who we are. And sadly, it's difficult to break free from the control that some religious communities have over persons, especially when one has been told over and over again that one will somehow be estranged from God, estranged from the divine, if one does not believe and behave as the religious community requires. Often the conditional love and acceptance that we experience, the conditional love and acceptance we experience within religious communities that require adherence to a set of beliefs and doctrines in order to be included, that becomes a substitute for the unconditional love and acceptance of who we are. When we realize that the offering of conditional love and acceptance is more about controlling us rather than actually loving and accepting us, it can be an experience of loss for us. It can be experienced as a heartbreaking loss of community and belonging when you realize that the persons you thought loved and accepted you for who you are really have predicated that on a certain set of beliefs, a certain way of behaving that you must adhere to continue to experience that love and acceptance. And when one begins to question or challenge or even reject beliefs and doctrines upon which love and acceptance are predicated in some religious communities, the persons who do that are perceived as a threat. And often they are no longer accepted as part of the community. They no longer receive that conditional love and acceptance that they once experienced. They enter into a form of religious exile. And their admission to be admitted back, their admission back into the religious community can only come from recanting their heretical beliefs or through suppressing who they really are. We'll accept you back. Just recant. We'll accept you back. Just be what we want you to be rather than who you truly are. Having been a member of a religious community in my youth, in which love and full acceptance were conditional and predicated on adhering to a set of beliefs about God and Jesus, I know firsthand what the backlash feels like when one questions such a system of conditional love and acceptance. I need to note that my parents were not a part of that community. I was actually a part of that community in a way that I think was problematic for them because they saw the conditional love and acceptance that was there rather than the unconditional love and acceptance, which may be why my parents became Unitarian Universalists. But I know firsthand what that backlash can feel like when you question those systems. I know what it feels like to no longer be fully accepted in a community that had once been so important to me and to my religious identity. Back in the early days of Facebook, remember those early days of Facebook? When you thought it was wise just to connect with anyone and everyone from your youth? I certainly connected with a lot of persons that probably I might not have connected with had I thought through it a little bit more carefully. But during those early days of Facebook, I very publicly proclaimed my views, and these were views that I had held since 1988, really. But, before Facebook, when you held views and wrote about them, not too many people heard them or saw them. But in the day of Facebook, when I publicly proclaimed my views that all persons, regardless of their sexual orientation or their gender identity, should be fully included in the life and ministry of our religious communities, specifically in my case, the United Methodist Church. And I also made it clear, publicly proclaimed at that same time that I did not believe in the existence of hell. Oh my goodness. Or that one has to believe in supernatural miracles, or that one even has to identify as a Christian to be included in the unconditional love and acceptance of the divine mystery within beloved community. When I said that on Facebook, I heard about it. I lost track of the number of messages I received condemning me for my views, just condemning me, period, and attempting to shame me or guilt me into either recanting my views or, if I could not recant my views, leave my role as a minister within a Christian denomination. Although these responses led me to experience a little bit of, my own measure of religious trauma, although by that time it really didn't bother me too much what other people thought, but it did lead me to experience some measure of religious trauma. That religious trauma that I experienced is somewhat mild in comparison to the religious trauma that so many persons have experienced in their religious communities when they discover that a love and acceptance that they once thought was unconditional actually has so many strings attached to it that they cannot be who they really are and continue to remain within their religious community. This is why the third principle of Unitarian Universalism is so important. It reminds us that our religious communities can be a place where love and acceptance are a given and not something that has to be earned through believing or behaving in a certain way. And in this context of love and acceptance, we know that we can challenge one another to grow spiritually together in our congregations and within our communities, challenging ourselves, become better persons within community. The third principle calls us to cultivate communities that are places where we all can be who we truly are. Places of respite that provide healing from religious trauma. Places to grow spiritually and live more fully into beloved community, where all are loved and where all are accepted and where all belong. May we work together to make it so. Our parting thought comes from Jessica Spear from, what a title, Middle School Safety Goggles Advised, exploring the weird stuff from gossip to grades, cliques to crushes, and popularity to peer pressure. Jessica writes, everyone looks for different things in friendship, but deep down, everyone is trying to find the same stuff, acceptance and belonging.